1.5 million lives. That is the widely accepted human toll of the 8-year revolution that ripped this country from a global empire. To understand the modern Algerian state, we have to look past its current industrial wealth and confront the sheer volume of blood required to define its borders. On a map of Africa, Algeria is impossible to miss. It is the largest country on the continent, a massive stretch of territory covering nearly 1 million square miles. It is a nation of two worlds. In the north, a fertile Mediterranean coast holds the vast majority of the population, but move south and that greenery disappears into the deep Sahara. This interior covers 80% of the land. It is a varied landscape of rocky plateaus and shifting dunes where water is the most precious resource, and the sun dictates the rhythm of life. This combination of massive scale and extreme terrain creates a geography that is as strategically valuable to an empire as it is difficult to secure. For centuries, this coast was home to the Ottoman Regency of Algiers, a formidable maritime power that used its fleet to dominate Mediterranean trade. That autonomy ended abruptly in 1830. Using a diplomatic insult as a pretext, the French Empire launched a massive naval invasion, seizing the coastline and pushing inland. Resistance was immediate. Tribes across the region unified under Emir Abdelkader, a scholar and military leader who spent 15 years fighting a sophisticated guerrilla war against the French expansion. But France was committed to total control. They declared Algeria an integral part of the French homeland, and spent the next century systematically suppressing local culture, seizing land, and enforcing a strict hierarchy that left the native population with almost no political rights. This century of violent suppression failed to erase the Algerian identity. Instead, it compressed a fractured tribal society into a single, militant national consciousness. In the early hours of November 1st, 1954, that consciousness erupted. The National Liberation Front, or FLN, launched a coordinated series of attacks across the country, starting an 8-year war for total independence. The conflict was devastatingly asymmetric. The FLN relied on urban sabotage and mountain ambushes, while the French military responded with massive troop deployments and a campaign of state-sponsored torture that shocked the world. By 1962, the French position was untenable. The signing of the Evian Accords secured independence, but it also triggered a panicked exodus. Within months, nearly 1 million European settlers abandoned their homes and fled across the sea. For the first time in over 130 years, Algerians held total sovereignty over their land, though it had cost them hundreds of thousands of lives to achieve. However, the victory was complex. The secretive military tactics the FLN used to win the war were immediately turned inward, establishing the foundations of a deeply authoritarian new government. Despite decades of forced cultural erasure, the core of Algerian identity had survived. It was anchored by a shared religious faith and a unique fusion of Arab and indigenous Berber traditions. You can still walk through that history in the Kasbah of Algiers. These narrow alleyways and thick stone walls outlasted the French occupation, serving as the physical heartbeat of a culture that refused to be assimilated. In the deep desert, traditions like the nomadic lifestyle of the Tuareg and the concept of Twiza, or communal solidarity, remained untouched by colonial policy. The 1962 victory wasn't just a reclamation of soil. It was the formal resurrection of an identity that an empire had spent over a century trying to destroy. Shortly after independence, the new government discovered a resource that would change their global standing forever: vast reservoirs of oil and natural gas hidden beneath the Sahara. This discovery allowed a war-torn country to rapidly industrialize, building massive pipeline networks and processing plants to export their subterranean wealth to the world. This chart shows the reality of the modern Algerian economy. Hydrocarbons now account for an overwhelming 98% of the country's total exports. This wealth gave the state immense power, but it also entrenched a rigid political elite. The government used energy profits to buy social peace, while stifling the growth of the democratic institutions many of the original revolutionaries had died for. The wealth that financed the dream of independence now serves as a golden cage, leaving the economy brittle and dependent on global energy prices. That energy wealth also gives Algeria massive geopolitical leverage. As Europe looks for alternatives to traditional suppliers, Algeria has become a vital lifeline. From these industrial ports, massive undersea pipelines and tanker fleets feed the energy grids of the Mediterranean, keeping the lights on for millions of Europeans. This means Algeria's internal stability is no longer just a local issue. It is a critical component of global energy security. For centuries, Algeria has been a survivor, outlasting the Ottomans, the French Empire, and the harshness of the Sahara. As the 20th century closed, a new internal friction surfaced, a clash of visions for the country's future that would shatter the post-war peace. The triumph of the 1960s was about to give way to a dark decade, a period where the nation would be forced to fight its most painful war yet, a war against itself. When the power grids of southern Europe face a critical shortfall, the solution usually ignites thousands of miles away in the Sahara Desert. Algeria is an indispensable energy lifeline for the Mediterranean, but the entity controlling that energy is vastly more complex than a standard republic. For diplomatic summits and public consumption, the state presents a civilian face, a president, a cabinet, and a functioning bureaucracy that signs the treaties and negotiates the exports. But the state structure is bicephalous, two-headed. Real authority and ultimate veto power belongs to a shadowy hierarchy of military and intelligence elites. Since independence in 1962, this military bloc has quietly overseen the presidency, ensuring civilian leaders do not cross the armed forces. This shadow government bypasses the need for a democratic mandate through a simple, highly expensive mechanism. They purchase domestic silence using the nation's vast hydrocarbon wealth. This chart shows exactly how dependent the Algerian state is on that single resource. Hydrocarbons account for 83%. To prevent that, the military stepped in, canceled the vote, and arrested the political leaders. The fallout was the Black Decade. Die-hard extremist factions waged a brutal insurgency against the military. By the time an amnesty agreement was reached in the early 2000s, over 100,000 Algerians had been killed. That trauma forged a strict, unwritten social contract. The military would guarantee absolute physical security and underwrite the cost of living. In exchange, the populace would surrender demands for political pluralism. When the Arab Spring toppled regimes across North Africa in 2011, the streets of Algiers remained largely quiet. The population bypassed the uprisings out of a deep, paralyzing fear of returning to the bloodshed of the 90s. Today, the protectionist, state-led model that secured the country is choking it. Heavy military control and severe import restrictions have stunted the private sector. Outside of oil and gas, the economy produces very little. This line graph shows the human cost of that stagnation. As state oil revenues slide, youth unemployment has surged, approaching 30%. A massive demographic of young, educated citizens is entering an economy with virtually no formal jobs to offer them. The government attempted a stopgap in 2022, offering an 18,000 dinar monthly allowance to young job seekers. But strict requirements for formal employment history, combined with digital bottlenecks on the state platform, mean a vast majority of the eligible youth are entirely locked out of the benefit. The state's strategy of buying social peace is mathematically collapsing. Millions of young people are being forced into the informal economy, completely detached from the state's financial leverage. The timeline for a correction is shrinking. By 2026, Algeria faces rebounding inflation, widening trade deficits, and the prospect of issuing its first-ever sovereign sukuk to cover the financial gaps through costly external borrowing. Yet, exactly as the state's internal finances buckle, foreign reliance on Algiers has peaked. Following heavy sanctions on Russian energy, the European Union aggressively courted Algeria to secure pipeline gas and critical LNG shipments. The continent's long-term energy plans run right through the Sahara. Projects like the South H2 corridor are being designed to eventually transport massive quantities of green hydrogen from North Africa straight to European industry. This creates a severe geopolitical paradox. Europe's most vital energy lifeline is anchored to a regime rapidly depleting the capital required to maintain its own internal stability. This map illustrates the immediate geopolitical risk. If the economic strain causes the Algerian state to fracture, the pipelines crossing the Mediterranean shut down. Southern Europe would face severe energy rationing. Simultaneously, a breakdown in Algerian military authority creates a massive security vacuum. Extremist groups in the Sahel would lose their primary obstacle, and Europe faces a rapid, massive wave of migration. Algiers is caught in a trap of its own making. An aging military elite is trying to dictate terms to a young population that has no memory of the civil war and absolutely no patience to suffer for it. The system relies on expensive subsidies to function, and the money is running short. If Algeria falters, the shockwaves will hit European power grids and African borders at the exact same moment.